Going to talk about a project very close to home, done actually on campus. And so it's Sparrows in the Mist. And sometimes, actually, you know the fog well, sometimes there actually are sparrows in the mist. And the title of the talk is a fun play on word. When I talk to students, jokes often go over the head, but we're all of the same age here, so you remember this movie, Diane Fossey and Going Off to Africa. And so if you look at the teaser, it says, she left everything she knew and entered a world few have ever seen. To save a wondrous creature from the cruelty of man, she went further than anyone ever dared. Some say she went too far. So I had to make my own poster for this talk, and I gave it to a departmental talk once, and I thought I'd get a few chuckles. My colleagues fell out of their seats for some reason. So he left the comfort of his home and his coffee to take the 3-minute voyage to a strange world full of bizarre plants and little brown birds. Some say he did not go far enough. But I think it was the perfect sweet spot. And first, a big shout out to Arboretum. They facilitated our work. They planted all those nice plants for our sparrows. Who knew? The hummingbirds are actually an afterthought. The whole Arboretum was planted for golden crowned sparrows. Project started 23 years ago with 2 amazing grad students who are still close personal friends. We're still working on the project. We're about to submit a paper on the work. So this project is a great socializer too. It's kept me in touch with my students, and it turns out over 100 undergrad volunteers have been involved. Community members, many of you may know Jenny Anderson, who was associated with the Environmental Sciences Department. She's been here from the start. And we've had 3 different, yes? I've got I can't even see that.
Okay. Don't worry about it.
I'm not sure that this is going to let me do what I'm teaching. It may just be something I have to stick with because the system is not anywhere near the system that I'm usually working with. I must just try. Mike, it loves you. Okay, you got it. I got it? It's not letting me get back to.
You need to get back to a slide set.
Same problem we had before. It's just not, it's hidden in a window somewhere, and I'm not smart enough to know where to find it. The technical guy, right? But you're on your screen and there's nothing, so back, there's nothing on bottom. Right? No, I'm right there left, bottom of the lowest one. That left edge of your screen. That's
He doesn't see the something.
Right. Somebody else that knows what they're doing. It's not stuff. My computer has never done this before on any other system, so it's not a lifelong learner. You might have to open it again, yeah. Okay, if I have to open it again. We may not be able to get rid of that. No, it's not letting me get through. Sorry, we have to start from scratch. We'll just have to have the titles covered. This is not, I mean, just ignore it. Yeah. Because it seems like this is just not.
That's why I don't want people to say. We've got,
Can I plug this in? Yeah.
you're right, people in the crowd.
There we go. So
Yeah, now he's in. Now here's a spotlight. Yeah.
letting me.
Now he's gonna share.
Should wait
Uh,
before we do our
I sound all lit up.
count.
Yeah, till the very end.
yeah, I've lost my mouse ability.
Good. Knows what he's doing.
Yeah,
He's good. Now he's gonna share the screen. That's why don't say anything.
My
That's
back fist
flowing.
stupid thing.
Fair enough. There it is, right there, right?
This is really
I
annoying.
know the mouse is going away. I see,
Yeah.
I see what you're seeing. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Is it this one right here?
Yep.
There you go.
Zoom is the pain in the ass. And so now we need to share it.
Yeah.
I'll stop share, but we have to share again. Okay. Good.
Okay,
So at the end,
Wait, area.
yes.
I'm gonna come up
Well,
and
actually,
get,
Yeah, yeah.
come and set up the pairs.
Sounds good.
I've not had this happen in 20 years.
We can see it.
Shouldn't be this comp. Basically, anytime you bring Zoom into the mix here,
There you go.
everything goes to hell in a handbasket.
Okay.
It looks good on Zoom, Bruce.
The
Oh,
the mouse is like in it.
okay, very top
Different
full screen, yeah. The mouse is not actually where it's supposed to be, so it's, we're having a hard time actually pressing it.
Okay. No, the screen is off. There you go. Can you?
But then we got that, how do we get rid of this?
Close the gallery, close the gallery.
No, I can't close it.
Can't close.
What does it? Okay. Is it like this?
Yeah. All right. Okay. Could have been,
No,
It's okay.
okay. There we go, okay. All right, there we go. Okay, we'll have to rush through to get, because I was told we have to get out of here at noon flat. Migratory birds have split personalities, so if you look at them in the breeding grounds, they're territorial. It's typical family, mom and dad and kids. When they migrate south, they completely change and become very social, and this applies to sparrows, robins. It's a very typical thing. Breeding birds have been incredibly well studied, but wintering birds are virtually unstudied. And so this project sort of grew out of that basic lack of information, and also reflects my own experience. I'm a behavioral ecologist, which means I'm interested in what animals do from an evolutionary and ecological perspective. Why do they do it, and why does it make sense? And also, as I'll point out, there's a lot of focus on variation among individuals. And so my main two research themes for much of my life were female reproductive strategies, breeding and parental care, so nesting, and then signals, also nesting. The buntings shown here, the Lasley buntings and lark buntings, they were studied on the breeding grounds. And so until I had a kid, all of my focus was on breeding birds. And then I had a kid, had to stay around Santa Cruz. And so my students and I started this project in the Arboretum. It was a funny project because it actually started as an undergrad class. My PhD student was the TA, and he said, we should start banning those birds. And so my two students just took the lead on, like, let's start banning these birds and see what we can find. And so each sparrow gets a unique color combination. Those are kids' toys. Those bands, those are perler beads that cost about a thousandth of a penny. They're way cheaper than the 50 cents you pay for a real bird band, so they're cheap and they're better. And every bird gets a unique combination, and so we're following known individuals, and we have a database on them, so we know when we caught this bird, various things about it. and that becomes important. And the sparrows do actually hang out in little flocks. And in winter, the reason these birds are hanging out in flocks, there's a huge benefit. There is safety in number. This is a universal principle from ecology. Things group together and gain safety for a variety of reasons from predators. And so that's why they're doing it in winter. But there's also costs. There's disease. They also compete for food. There's often enough food to go around, but there's still competition about who gets to be top dog and get the best food first. And so here's two golden-crowned sparrows going at it. The Arboretum is paradise for golden-crowned sparrows. They, unlike many sparrows, they eat a lot of vegetation. They eat grass. Any gardeners out here know that they dislike it when the sparrows show up because they eat all their kale. They eat nectar. And so the Arboretum is really an amazing place for the sparrows. They have it pretty easy. And we also put out additional food. This is a feeding station baited with millet. They will sometimes deign to move away from the Banksias and come and eat the free food. And we train them on these sites. We've been using the same sites for years. So we can, this is a map. We basically keep track of where the sparrows are based on a gridded map of the Arboretum. And we have feeding stations and trapping stations are the same thing, spread throughout. And this is like a roach motel. They can check in, but they can't check out. There's a little treadle door, and we lock them open. And so the birds get used to free food with no cost. But then on the day we want to trap them, the lock goes off and they go in and the door comes down. And so, but they don't really mind because they come back some of them come back within half an hour. It's like, we just caught you today. So they're not really too traumatized by the experience. We've now color banded some 2,000 individual birds over 23 years. And on average, about 40 or 50% return from the previous winter. So we only get to know them in the winter. They go off to Alaska, Yukon, British Columbia, and then come back. And so we're just looking at the winter portion of their lives. And in the early days, there were a few things that caught our attention. These are photos. We take photos of every bird, a headshot, and we extract information. You can see tremendous variation in their crown in both the black and gold. And variation is specifically for winter. In summer, they don't show this variation. So the variation, if it's serving a purpose, is specific to winter. So we thought that's one of the things we should look at. Their social behaviors seem pretty interesting as well. And as I said, virtually unknown. What migratory birds in winter are doing beyond just they're in flocks is not very well understood. And so we took a much deeper dive. And I don't think this is going to play, but if this were to play, it'd be a 3-note. And they sing a ton in winter. In fact, you can tell when they show up because as soon as they arrive, they start singing their heads off. And at the Arboretum, people would always tell me, the birds just arrived today. They're singing all over the place. And so it's unusual for birds to sing in winter. And so that's also a focus. So the 3 main foci of our study, and what I'll talk about very briefly in each of these today is the crown coloration serving as a signal? And particularly a competitive signal. What is the pattern of social organization? This is not testing hypotheses. It's like, what's going on? We know so little, we can't even have hypotheses yet. It's like, what are they up to? And then finally, why do they sing in winter? So starting, I'll break out the 3 parts. Does the crown variation function as a signal? And we were not the first to notice that these sparrows show variation, but we were the first to actually do some studies about the bird. And we're also not the first to suggest that plumage may serve as a winter signal. Harris sparrow is a close relative in some very famous work by a hero of mine, a creative guy called Sievert Roller. He worked at the Burke Museum in Seattle, which involved collecting birds for their specimens. And he noticed that every single wintering sparrow in the collection had a different amount of black on the belly. And he thought, that's kind of weird. And so he hypothesized why this might make sense. And he suggested that it might serve as a badge of status, which is a plumage patch might signal fighting ability, and it might allow flock members to settle fights when they're at a seed pile together or a food pile without actually risking a fight. And this would work if flocks are fluid and these birds don't know each other. And so you're basically, if you're interacting with strangers a lot, do you really want to pick a fight? If you're fighting over every morsel of food, it gets very, very expensive. So he hypothesized this is a quick and dirty way to solve things. The more black, the more dominant. And he did a whole series of elegant experiments that supported that. And it's been looked at in a whole variety of species. So these badges of status are widespread. Lemurs have them, fish, sparrows, lizards, and even recently social insects. So it's widespread in the animal kingdom to use these simple patches to be used as competitive threats. There's some unresolved questions, even though they're widespread, which is, should there always only be one signal? The Goldien finch on the left is an example of mating signals. And in mating signals, if you think about peacocks or things like this, they're just dazzling arrays of lots of signals. But in these badges of status, it's typically one, a black patch, typically black. Most of these are black or blue in some lizards. And so the question is it always only one? And second, related to this sort of thing Sievert Rohr was talking about is, what's the social context of badge? Are they using it just among strangers or among friends as well? And I'm not going to answer this, but it's an interesting question. It's like, why not cheat? If it's so easy to have a big yellow patch in your head, why doesn't everybody just fake it? And I won't go there with the cheap example of a fake yellow hair on top. All right. So here's a golden crowned sparrow showing off its fine. This is a nice bold one. And so we had, the nice thing about working on campus is we could have tons of undergrads help out at various levels. And sometimes they would do a senior thesis and take lead of a project. And so we would often use students to help us sort of say, is this a tractable question? And then they would be involved in the study later and then the publication. So Chris Troll, the human, got to work with Betty the sparrow and others. And we had him just do an observational study. All the birds we catch, we get a headshot on. So we know from the birds in the Arboretum how much yellow and black they have. So now we just have to figure out their dominance. And that's pretty easy because, and we can actually quantify it. If you put a photo in Photoshop, it'll isolate the black pixels and the gold pixels and tell you exactly the area. And so we can actually, it's very simple. So we've got exact measurements of how much for each bird, how many pixels that can be converted to square centimeters of black versus gold. And then you can go and look at the behavior. And there's two ways that we look at dominance. An obvious one involves aggression. Here you can see the bird that's scooting in is chasing off the other bird that's fleeing. And so that's aggressive. It's chase, they usurp each other, they fight. But there's a more subtle thing going on that if you pay attention to these birds. This is also dominance. That bold bird is hogging the seed pile, and this wimpy bird is looking longingly at that millet, drooling, but it is not challenging the dominant bird. That's called avoidance. So a dominant bird never takes its turn. It basically says, might is right, I'm going to grab it. And so if a bird is waiting its turn, it's telling you that it's subordinate. And so we can categorize the interactions. And it turns out that the crown colors, I won't go into too many details, the crown colors are used differently based on these different types of interactions, which is kind of cool. And so what Chris Troll, the human, found was that, yes, indeed, these colors correlate with dominance. Birds with bigger black were dominant, and birds with bigger gold were dominant. And in another study, that as a side thing, we also found that birds with bigger gold alone weren't challenged as much. So basically, if a bird with a wimpy yellow patch and there's a bird with a big yellow component to its patch, it won't even challenge it. The black is used for more aggressive, oh yeah, we're going to see who's bigger and maybe chase and what. So the yellow and the black seem to be used in different levels of escalation. And it turns out that unlike other birds, there are two separate independent badges of status in these birds, which is kind of unusual. So as scientists, we often state that correlation is not causation. And an observational study is correlational. And so what Chris found is these colors predict dominance. The question is, are the birds actually using that, or is it something else? And there's two other things that could be interfering with this and giving us a false sense that the signals are actually, that the plumage is actually signal. One is the plumage may correlate with something else, and we actually know that bigger bodied birds have more bold plumage, so it could be that their body size is what's driving it, not their color. And second, as we'll talk about in the middle part of the talk, these birds really get to know each other year after year, so they know each other very clearly. And so looking at how familiar birds interact, they may have learned early on that Betty the sparrow is a badass, and so they may just respond to the individual bird, not to the plumage. And so to deal with this, you have to do an experiment that randomizes two effects. You basically have to change the signal. And so with a Sharpie, you can make a dull bird bold. And what you are doing by randomly picking a bird is uncoupling any correlations. It could be a small bird or a big bird, but by randomly choosing, and we're doing, it's like gladiator trials. Or anybody here watch The Voice? Very much like The Voice. It's like, who's going to win in the paired things. And so you're randomly taking two birds, choosing one with a flip of a coin to be the comb over, the other one is a control bird. And to control for familiarity, we would grab birds from 2 or 3 kilometers apart that have never met. So we're controlling for the fact that they have no prior information. So strangers with manipulated heads. And these birds readily adapt to a short-term, they're in captivity for 24 hours. They go right back. They get trapped again, so they don't seem too put out by it. They get free food and water. And so we put them in these little cages after they've been separate overnight, and they behave normally, and they tell us who's dominant. And we did 2 separate experiments. We separately did black as one experiment and independently did gold. And you'll like the stats. The stats are really quite intuitive. 2 birds. If it's random, each one has a 50-50 chance of winning. So the random expectation here is if our makeover has no effect, each bird should have a 50% chance of winning. That's random. If our experiment is changing things, the experimental birds should deviate from 50-50, and you can just think about a coin toss. Here's what we found. Enlarged black patches won 14 out of 15, or think about 14 heads out of 15 tosses. Is that a random coin? No. That's highly deviant. And enlarged gold patches won in 16 out of 17 trials. So simply changing the plumage affected the dominance of these birds and confirms that they are actually using the plumage. So let's summarize the end of this first part. Plumage itself is what's determining the outcome of these interactions, and black and gold may signal different information because we found that they're used in slightly different contexts. So that was a bit of a novel spin. And we're going to return to the plumage a little bit later because there's an added twist. But we have to first look at the pattern of social organization. So as I said, if you look at the bird books, they'll tell you which species flock in winter, but like, what's a flock? I don't mean that as a navel-gazing existential question, but like, what's going on here? Like, is a flock always the same? Is there some structure here? And to point out what I mean by that, I made this up. If you go down to Jenny Road and look at sandpipers, the flocks are probably just random. There may not be much structure, and we know there are organisms like this. They just basically, flocks come and go. They don't really know each other. It's a random assortment. We watched a merlin pick off one of these birds, and so it's clearly they're gaining safety in number, but there's no particular friendship involved. It's like, let's live in a group, and you have my back while we're feeding, and I'll have your back. At the other extreme are extremely structured groups. Mammals like primates and that often have that. These are Galapagos mockingbirds. They live in family groups, and my friend Andrew Barry watched a territorial warfare. So you've got that line between these birds as their territory border, And these are long-lived social groups of relatives. And if you go back to the territory day after day, year after year, it's going to be the same individuals. The flock is a consistent thing, but there's possibilities for lots of things in between random and structured. And so when we first sicked really excellent birdwatcher, Oscar Johnson, oh, great. Good. On this, we found that we weren't initially sure we could follow sparrows away from feeders, but it turned out it's not difficult. So we just went out and looked for flocks of birds. They're all banded. So we're just asking who's flocking with whom. And when you do that for a while, you realize you come back an hour later, they've kind of changed. The flocks are not long-lived in terms of the specific individuals that are in them. And so then the question we ask is, are flocks just random groups from the entire Arboretum, or is there some lurking structure here? And to get at that, fortunately, just when we were getting our data, they were developing new analytical tools for doing this. It's called social network analysis. And it's basically looking at connections. It's used for airports, Facebook connections. It's sort of like who's friends of friends. And it's perfect for looking at the patterns in sparrows. And so I'll give you an example. It's not a bird example. These are Galapagos sea lions. And the researchers just looked at short-term associations between individuals. And then after you've got hundreds of those, you can ask the computer, are those associations, are there patterns to those? Is it just random? And what you can see from this, no, it's not random. There are discrete little communities, color-coded, of these sea lions that are spread around the island, and the interacting animals tend to come from within the colored group. And so that's one example of structure that you wouldn't get at just looking day to day at who's hanging out at the feeding station or whatever. And social network tools are very powerful for discerning this. And so what a social network is, the dots are individuals. So these dots might represent these two birds. And after you've got lots of data, the line that connects those individuals is called an edge. And the thickness of that line is what proportion of the time that those birds were seen were they in the same flock. If they're always in the same flock, they get a really thick line. It's like they're best friends forever. And so you pay attention to that thickness. Or sometimes there's a weak bond. Maybe 25% of the time they're in the same flock. Sometimes they're not. And then for some individuals, they're never seen together. And then the algorithm uses this and tries to cluster things that are connected so that if you and I have the same friend, we're going to be in the same group. And so it's friends of friends. It's looking for non-random associations at some upper level. And it's very good at that. And then it also, to do this, we had to decide what's a flock. And just watching the birds and the cohesiveness, we decided arbitrarily that a 10-meter or a 10-yard diameter is a flock. And that biologically seems pretty good. It gave us great results. You could choose different things if you wanted to, but that basically gave us some interesting insights. And that's when they're moving around, they're actually sticking pretty close together. So that seemed like a reasonable thing. And this work was done by Dai Shizuka. He became, when he was in my lab, he was working on coots with me, but then he went on and did some postdocs learning these social network things, and he's become one of the world experts on it, developing new methods. He's really a guru. And so that was a perfect timing. And so he created this artwork. And so this is a cartoon depiction of 4 different flock observations. And so notice there's time period 1 and different locations. And so with these data and social network methods, you can then construct a network. And Dai actually did a network for these actual fake data. And here's what you get. And what you'll see is RY, red, yellow, and GO have a very thick band because they're in all 4 of these groups. And so again, it's pulling out patterns of who's strongly connected with whom and who's not. And this is the start. And then if you look at the whole population, you can see, are there other sort of clusters or structures, what's going on? And what we found was completely unexpected for any wintering bird. we found distinct communities. So in the first year we did this in 2010, we found 3 communities. And what is showing here is the birds within the blue community are non-randomly associating with each other. Yellow community, non-randomly associated with each other, and green, non-randomly associating, and about 90%. So basically, flocks are non-random collections from the color. So if you go to a flock at any point, 90% of its members are going to be from the community. There's a little bit of spillover, but basically, flocks are subsets of communities. What makes it even more interesting is the communities are geographically spread out. In the Arboretum, there were 3 different communities, and they were using different parts of the Arboretum. The dense colored thing is where tells you where 50% of the observations of the flock is. The outlines are 95%. These are just different ways to visualize your data. But if you look at 50%, 50% of the time, these communities of sparrows are using quite different parts of the Arboretum. We did it for 3 years, and we found the same thing year after year. The communities are in the same place. They reassemble. And critically important, if birds are alive, remember 40 to 50% die, but if the ones that are alive, they come back, they go to the same communities and hang out with their same friends. And a recent paper showed they're actually there for their friends, because if they have fewer friends, if they have bad luck and most of their friends from last year died, they move farther away. So they're coming back to be with their friends, not because they like the feeding station we happen to have with them. So they really are very, very social. This is kind of interesting. So this is the chimps in the mist version. I came across this review paper, and you could substitute chimpanzee with golden crown sparrow almost perfectly. And I'll read this to you. It's by the famous primatologist John Matani. We now know that chimpanzees live in fission fusion society. That's where flock membership changes, just like sparrows, fission fusion, the flocks come and go. From socially and geographically circumscribed unit groups or communities. That means like our map, color-coded communities across the chimp landscape, exactly the same. And subgroups from those committees form, identical. Now you're probably thinking, wow, I didn't know that sparrows were so brilliant. They're doing what chimpanzees do. A key point here is we should never confuse the social system with the intelligence. There are spiders now that do this sort of thing. So the social system has nothing to do with their intelligence. It's just how they're associating with each other. So the fact that we find parallels between the sparrows and chimps isn't telling us anything that these sparrows are geniuses. It's just that they share some social things in common. And so what this means is sparrows form really, really long-term relationships, winter buddies. It's like if you had a condo in Florida and had your neighbors. It's basically the Florida condo model or Arizona condo model, where each winter you go back and meet your friends, and in summer go back to wherever you're coming from. Importantly, and this is where they do differ from the chimps, my PhD student, Nina Arnberg, did a genetic study of this. There is no kinship. These friends are just friends. They're not relatives. And that's a bit different from the chimps. Chimps do have some kinship involved in the structure. So that aspect is a bit different. But so it's kind of interesting to see that you don't need kinship to have these like incredibly strong long-term bonds. And a question we always get asked, so I added this in at 10:30 before I came here. They don't spend the summer with their friends. We did a very small tagging study and then teamed up with a group from Davis. The birds in winter, including in this example, birds that were in the same community in winter are going to very different spots on the breeding ground. So these winter social groups are not a carryover from summer where birds migrate together. They are forming de novo on the wintering grounds, and then the birds go back to wherever they go in the summer. Now, I said we'd return to plumage. The fact that these birds are best friends forever in winter means that they know each other really well. And that raised a fun follow-up study is, what happens if you do the experiment now where you do the painting of the head but you do it with birds that know each other. Would they still get fooled? And so do familiar birds continue to use the crown signals once they know each other? And so we actually completely repeated the earlier study and added a new component. We didn't just do a new study and compare it. We had to redo, and it was a 2-year project that involved 2 undergraduates, Theodore Block, who then became a PhD student, and we did the same head manipulations. Oops, it didn't work. Okay, I was going to, let's just see. Oops, somehow. There we go. Yeah. So this is the striptease part of it. So if you look at just the unfamiliar birds, this is just the repeating of the earlier experiment where the birds were taken from Empire Grade or Pogonip. They don't know each other. You get the same effect. Manipulating their colors, it's up around the 85, 90% win rate. So for unfamiliar birds, again, we get the same pattern. But when you look at birds from the same core area, the experiment has no effect. They're ignoring the thing. So Dye came up with a great title for that paper is Experimental Plumage Manipulations Only Fool Strangers. And what it also means is these birds know each other. But it also means they're not using the head colors to identify. So people always say, how do sparrows know each other? Like, how do we know each other? I don't have to have you don't know me because I'm bald. You may recognize that I'm bald, but you can probably recognize me in other ways too. So organisms don't need massively weird ways to be able to tell Bob from Judy from Betty. They can probably look at face shape and beak shape and other things just like we can. Okay, how are we doing for time, by the way? Oh, good. So last but not least, why do golden crowned sparrows sing in winter? This was kind of low-hanging fruit because there's, like the social behavior, there's not very much on winter singing. And most of the song, just to give by way of background, most of the song literature focuses on breeding and northern hemisphere, which means you're focusing on males. So most of what we know about birdsong is about male song and northern hemisphere song and mating. There's now resurgent interest in or new interest in female song because it turns out to be very widespread, and song outside of the breeding season, which is what we did. And so we were thinking about what hypotheses were already in the literature for why golden crowned sparrows might be singing. And that it's kind of cheap because we can get rid of them almost instantly based on what we already know about the birds. First, it could be that young males are practicing for summer. Some fabulous work done just up at another UC system on white-crowned sparrows showed that white-crowned sparrows in October and November, the new males practice their song for the next summer. They've never sung, so what they're doing is they're getting their instrument tuned up and learning to sing, and so there's a period where you hear white-crowned sparrow song. It's the young males practicing. So that makes a very clear prediction. Males and young. Second, if you go up into the Sierras, if you go skiing or something, you may notice Townsend solitaires defending juniper berry trees. So there are some birds that will defend territories in winter, and they'll sing. And so another thing, so maybe territoriality in winter is what's going on. Or you throw your hands up and go some other function, because the first two don't really cut it. And so I'll quickly rule out the first two, and then we'll look at some other function. So here's what we found. Only some birds sing, 20 to 30%. And you hear song everywhere, but they're actually hard to find. They hide in bushes. It's like finding a singer is like finding gold. It's like we get excited, found a singer, because it's like they taunt you. But it's hard data, but we now have like 20 years of data, so we can say something about it. Song is most common early in the season. And we think that's because they're coming back and setting stuff up. We think that song may be important so what that means is whatever function it is, it's not happening through the whole season. Both sexes sing, and if anything, females sing more than males. That kind of rules out the first hypothesis about male singing. And most singers are not yearlings, they're older birds. Again, doesn't look like that first hypothesis can stand. And finally, singers live in groups. I've already told you they have communities, and so If it's defending resources, it's not in the classic territorialities. It's a little bit of semantics because singing for territories means it's my space. It could be that they're singing for group territoriality, in which case that would be a novel hypothesis, but it's still territoriality, but a territory. But we'll visit that as well. Too bad you can't hear this. These birds are singing. We call them tethered. It's a singing duel. These birds have just come back and they're singing back and forth, just like the voice. And we call them tethered because they don't want to be more than like 2 feet apart. And these duels can go on for hours. It's crazy. It's not just a bird randomly singing. So when you see that kind of commitment and that kind of sticking to each other, they're doing something important here. They're establishing something. And occasionally we've seen them erupt into violence. And so it's not always friendship, but it could be friendship as well. The next one I'm going to show you, Jenny Anderson discovered this. We trap birds, and Jenny was going like, sometimes you'd have a bird in a trap, and there'd be a bird on top of the trap singing at the one stuck in the trap. It like didn't matter that its frenemy got stuck. It's like, we're having a contest here, and don't try to hide in that trap. And so I'm going to show you a video of that. I was able to and actually Mike Eaton, Lee Corin was with me when I took this. We used our cell phones to get this. So she got to see this in action, mutual friend of ours. So we caught the bird, and that bird's trying to get in the cage. Like, you should be afraid, fly away. And I set up my camera, came back, and it's running around. And then what you can't hear is it leans into the cage and starts singing at the one inside the cage. Like there. So this is really weird behavior. And so we mined our data set and then linked stuff to sort of social network because we know we can reject those simple things. So the question here is, does this link in any way to the social stuff we've been finding? And the answer turns out that yes. Birds that sing in these duels are best friends. They tend to have very strong connections. It's not singing between groups. If it was group territorial, you might expect the mafia overlord from purple group feeding or singing against yellow group. It's not. It's singing within the group. And so that was kind of a surprise. And added to this, we need to really nail this down, but we have some evidence that song connects to dominance and may sometimes trump plumage. So here's an example. Brenda here has a nice black eyebrow. Judy doesn't. So by all accounts, Brenda should be dominant over Judy. But if Judy is a singer, she might well dominate over Brenda. We have some data that shows that. Again, we need to redo that, but there were some early hints that song independently correlates with dominance. And so putting this together, what we sort of think may be going on is they have to sort of reform these groups. Every year they come back from wherever, and the first time birds encountered each other, it's like, I haven't seen you since the fall. And it may just be the dominant ones. We haven't gone there yet, but they may have to reestablish dominance. They're not using crowns. And once our experiments also show that once they've established things, they don't fight. They actually share food somewhat. They're much more cooperative than random sort of unfamiliar birds. So they may need to sort of establish the rules. Basically, I'm top dog. We're going to settle that now. And then we don't have to do this anymore. And in some cases, it may actually be, am I going to let you in my group? Because there's turnover. There's always old birds that die and new birds that join. And some of this may be vetting is like, you going to be a member of my group? I don't know. How good are you at singing? We don't know, but it's very interesting. And so to summarize, I've told you a few different things. I've told you that their plumage colors function as a badge of status that helps them settle contests over resources, but that this is specifically used when strangers interact. Once they know each other for a while, our experiments suggest that they start ignoring any changes to the signal. They already know their relationships. Our social network studies show that these sparrows live in spatially based winter communities with strong within group bonds that endure across years and many, many years in some cases. Pretty phenomenal. And song is not about male practice or winter territoriality in terms of single birds defending territories, but links to the social structure and seems to function for bonds or relationships within groups as opposed to across groups. And I think with that, we are done. And if there's time, happy to have questions. Let the grilling begin.
There it is. Yes. Question, I gotta give this.
Can you tell me what the lifespan is of a golden state?
Yeah, when you ask that question, there's two questions you're asking is like, what's the maximum longevity and what's the average? And for birds, it's thought that a lot of the mortality is pretty random. It's like a random draw. It's like your chances of surviving to next year, you roll the dice, in which case some individuals get lucky. I think it's not entirely luck, but there is a lot of probably just randomness. The average lifespan is about 2 years, but our oldest birds are 8 years, but that's out of a sample of 2,000. So if you actually look at the distribution of ages of individual birds, mostly it's 2, 3, and then 4 and 5, and it goes down and down. And that's true for many birds. The bigger the sample you get, the more likely you are to get those really long-lived individuals, but they're not representative. They're either lucky or good. It's a good question.
Do you think that the head markings would affect how songbirds, the singing occurs? In other words, if what they did before and when you changed the colors, whether the.
Oh, I see. Yes. It's a good question. I'll step back, and hidden in there is like, how do the birds even know what we've done to them? Birds don't have mirrors. Right. And so to preface your question is like, we paint them up and all of a sudden it's like, whoa, I'm winning fights. So to answer that question, that must be some kind of feedback. It seems pretty clear. There's poker games where you can put the cards on. You don't get to see your hand. You get to see everybody else's hand. It's kind of like that. It's like, oh, I know that person's got 2 aces. And so I think these birds get the feedback from the respect. That could, so it's a good question. It could actually make them bolder temporarily and go, wow, I should start singing. It's also possible that song and plumage are completely unconnected, that they're there for other reasons, because not all singers are extra bold. So there may be different underlying mechanisms that cause singing to be dominant and plumage to be dominant.
Yeah, we have a question from the Zoomers, and
Yeah, the question is, the response behavior changes with plumage modification. Does it make other bird do anything different?
Yes, they change their behavior in the trials. So they actually, repeating on that, they go from being super shy to being more assertive, going in sort of like avoiding less. So yes, they're getting we haven't actually looked at that, but that must be the case, because otherwise a bird would go like, I'm not going near that seed pile, to I'm taking the seed pile. Yeah.
I have 2 questions about the impact on the birds of what you have done to them. Number 1, after the bird changes its behavior as it sees the other birds treat it as dominant. What happens when the paint washes off? Does it keep that behavior, or does it go back to being who it was? Second question is, you put this jewelry on them,
Yeah.
and they're all different. And over time, do birds have preference for each other based on the jewelry? How does that affect their behavior toward each other?
Great questions. It's possible that birds could change short term, but I suspect that what Sievert Rohrer showed, one question is like, why not cheat? And what Sievert Rohrer showed is if you do exactly, you follow the birds through life, if you have a permanent, we washed it off. So basically they didn't have it very long. We washed it off. You can remove Sharpie with alcohol. So basically once they were gone, they were going to be treated the same way they were before. So it's probably short-lived, but what Sievert showed is if you force a bird to cheat, it gets punished. Its friends are, you're not a badass, and so they chase them more. So there's a sort of a self-correcting thing and we think that's what keeps that punishment is what keeps the whole system honest. Your question about bands is a bit of a fraught one. There's a huge literature on that. There was some early famous work done with zebra finches that showed that if you put the right colors on a zebra finch, they become very sexy, the males. It hasn't been replicated. So there's a few examples where jewelry actually does affect the behavior, but the sea of evidence suggests not. In our study of coot chicks, we used those same colored beads, but on the back of the head, and coot chicks are bright orange. So we wanted to make sure that we weren't affecting how attractive those babies were to their parents. So we did an exhaustive study to ask, does having orange or red on the back of your head if you're a baby coot make a difference? And it doesn't. The parents aren't paying any attention. So there's possible there's effect, but there's a fairly large literature that says birds probably aren't paying that much attention to the jewelry. But both excellent questions.
One more.
Going with, do they breed within the community? And then when the adolescents come of age, do they stay within the community or go to others?
That's what the tagging study, I went over that quickly, and the tagging study failed for a few different reasons. Our tagging study suggests that the birds that are in communities here do not go to the same place in summer. So they can't be maintaining those social things, and their kids can't be. It's possible they could be bringing their kids with them, and they might integrate into the same communities, but we would then pick that up because the kinship study would show that if there was a cross-generation parents bringing their kids with them, we would have picked that up with a genetic study, and there's no evidence for any kind of kinship pattern. So that's a good question, and we were able to test that.
Oh, where? All the way over there. Okay.
Thanks. So two quick questions that are related. Related birds sing a lot in winter, not just Harris's, but like white-throated sparrow and white-crowned sparrow here. Does that bear on any of your results that family members seem to behave the same way? And we've probably all noticed that these birds burst into song just before migrating. Right now, the white-crowned are about to leave, and it's deafening in some places, like around Antonelli Pond in the morning.
Those are both great questions. White-crowned sparrows may have some of this, but they clearly have the young males learning, which we don't, so there's some differences, but it doesn't mean they also don't have additional structure. Those hypotheses for singing are not mutually exclusive because some individuals could be singing for practice, some could be, so for this white-crowned sparrows, it's an open question. Sievert Rober told me at a meeting once, I asked him about the hair sparrows, and we talked about this. He said he's pretty sure that hair sparrows are doing the same sorts of things, but no one's actually looked at the social behavior. And the second question was spring. One thing we've wanted to do, but we always get worn out by the end of the years, our suspicion is we know that females don't sing on the breeding grounds because Dai Shizuka also studied sparrows in Alaska on the breeding grounds. And so we're pretty sure. And there's a big gap between the fall when there's lots of singing and winter's pretty quiet and then spring starts up. I'd wager a bottle of whiskey. My favorite bet is single malt whiskey. I would wager a bottle of Lagavulin that the singers in spring are males. But we want to, and so I think because then hormones are kicking in, totally different things, which suggests the physiological drivers of winter song and summer song may be quite different and interesting. Yeah.
So on the theme of what you're talking about, like I'm a bird watcher here and we love to chase vagrants in the winter. Okay, that's birds way out of range. You're Asian birds. And it's surprising how many actually come back to exactly the same spot a year later. And you have any comments about how that works?
No, I've noticed the same thing. And it sort of makes sense because they're lost, but once they find, so they're lost with respect to their original where they should be going in winter, but they probably know where they are now. And rather than try to go back, they probably just lock in. And so they're very like many birds, they're faithful to the same place. That's one thing we do know about winter migrants. So once they get lucky and like that red flank bluetail, it's going to come back year after year. And there's famous examples. There was a caracara up there, there's famous examples where year after year you get the same individual. What I've wondered for things like some of these Eurasian vagrants, I work on St. Paul Island, which is in Alaska, which is a paradise. It's like the vagrants that my birding friends pick up are ridiculous. And so there's a whole science of vagrants. I'm wondering if some of these wintering birds might be birds that now breed in Alaska, because there's been some movement. And in the last 3 decades, there's birds breeding in Alaska that never used to breed. And what typically happens is they go back to their ancestral, they retrace, like there's birds that don't take the shortest route to the tropics. If they were smart, they'd fly to Costa Rica, but they have a legacy of going back to Russia and then all the way to Africa because that's what's in their genes. But birds do shift occasionally. And so I'm wondering if some of these vagrants might be breeders in Alaska that now are starting to set up winter populations here, which is probably far-fetched for something as rare as a bluetail, but there may be some cases where that happens. So it's something to keep in mind. So it's a really interesting question.
What's the advantage from the evolutionary perspective of these golden crown sparrows going all the way up to Alaska, Canada to breed?
The $64 million question about migration. There's much higher productivity. So as you basically in those seasonal environments, there's a pulse of resources. And so one idea for why you evolve these migrants is it's a bad place to be in winter. Anybody who spent a winter in Anchorage probably knows that. But in summer, that's like unlimited insects. And so they get the safety of where we are in winter for incredible breeding resources. And notice in California, we have 2 different types of migrants. The neotropical ones were basically borrowing tropical birds for the summer that came out of resident tropical species that decided there's no food in the tropics in summer. I'm going up to Santa Cruz. And we also get the sparrows that are sort of year-round residents that start to move south. So when you think about migratory birds, you sort of have to think about, was their origin out of the tropics or are they more of a Nearctic sort of group? Because the answers might be a bit different. Yeah.
You haven't said much about the difference between male and female plumage and juveniles versus adults.
Thank you. That's a great question. It turns out we've actually got a paper we want to work on this. Juveniles tend to not have much marking, but none of these are perfect. So you can't really use them. We now have enough data to show that there's overlap. So you might be 90% correct or something. If it's a really, really bold, looks like a summer plumage bird, it's probably a male. Females are much more variable, and females can overlap with juveniles and up to males. And so females are more variable in winter. But yeah, it's a really good question. But that some of the banding people think that you can diagnostically go, oh, this is a female, this is a yearling. Our data suggests that you can't do that and be perfectly sure. There's a probabilistic element to that. So that's a great question. And in summer, I don't think the males and females are different. Or if they are, they're very subtle. It's not like a really clear dimorphism.
I'm unfortunately the one that has to say that we're running out of time. And so I want to thank you, Bruce, for this wonderful, wonderful talk.